Happy morning, everybody. I hope everyone is doing well, and I hope you guys have really rested up. You're probably wondering why on earth am I up at, nearly 7 in the morning. Actually, I was up at 4 in the morning. I've really been just praying very early, a lot, and I seem to have a hard time stopping now. So now it's like 4 in the morning, I get up and pray, and it is the best thing ever. Um, there's a lot of components that go into that, and today we're going to be talking about a part two of worship, understanding worship, uh, what it is, why we do it and things, and I really hope that this lesson is a blessing to you guys. If you have not checked out part one, please do not watch this. I'd rather you guys go ahead, watch part one. It's a two-part little series because I couldn't quite finish it all. Um, but yeah, it will really help things to make more sense. But hey, if you guys want to be naughty and bad anyway, then I would just say go ahead and watch this one, and then watch part one, and hopefully it's not that hard to harmonize. For those of you who perhaps really don't have the time or the patience, then I would strongly advise you to go to the end of this video and simply look at the summary point. Even then, what I call like the heart of the matter. But even then, if you decide to do that, you really be doing yourself a disservice. So if you have the patience, one of the fruits of the spirit, then this will um, greatly benefit you. And so, before I begin, I did want to say, this is brought to you by G Consciousness. Um, man, my big bro has definitely been a huge instrumental factor into the reasons why I'm able to broadcast. Um, and I really thank him for that. So, other than that, I'm going to go ahead and just begin. And so today we're going to be talking about worship in the Eucharist. The series continues. And by the way, for a lot of my, a lot of for a lot of my melanated folks, um, yeah, I use a mixture of images. Maybe I could have used more from the Coptic Orthodox Church, but you know what? So what? Who cares? Just flow with me here. You know, the main thing I wanted to say was that I just did have like some thoughts before we begin. When I personally do think about oh wait, hold on, time. Let me check to see if there's anybody in the chat. I'll go to check and see. All right, good. Well, I guess not. I guess I'm at a point where finally no one is awake. Okay, good. Yet somehow I have two people watching, so I don't know exactly who they are. But you know, first off, I wanted to say before we get into the whole thing about worship is that you know people have this belief that kind of begins with like you know early Christianity and things like that being man-made. The earlier you go back, you will see that early Christianity is far from being anything man-made. Especially when it comes to worship. And so, we could talk about like the founders of like Mormonism or Islam or Buddhism or even like Christian denominations. Like Lutheranism, Calvinism, and they always have this kind of thing in common. They were started by imperfect persons. God bless them. Nevertheless, they were still you know Christians. In a sense, um, in my personal opinion, more Luther than Calvin. But anyway, it's not so with Christianity. And so in terms of the early church, we can trace our origins all the way back to Christ Himself. And so that's a big difference in how early Christian mindset thinks and speaks about religion. And so from like a general Christian perspective and particularly of an early Christian perspective, in my position, it's more like I lean Eastern Orthodox. From that perspective, religion isn't about like man's reaching out for God or anything. It's really about God reaching out to man. And I say this all the time. God has been pursuing us ever since we left the garden. He's been reaching for us ever since we've left the garden, and even to the point of the cross, which I think is the biggest reach that God has ever done. Um, so church isn't just something that man builds for God. No, it's something that God builds for man. And the reason why I say church and build is because go back to my part one video. Okay, this is the reason why I can't get into all that. I just refer you to part one. For all you guys have taken the lesson, you guys know what I'm talking about. So church is like it's a two-part thing when you look in the Old and New Testament. Of course, it is you know a building. It is the temple of God. And of course, the biggest part is it is a communion of believers, right? So you have church, you have the assembly, you have those words. There's actually two words for them, and I forget what it was, but one referred to the temple and the other one referred to the people, and they're actually Greek words in the New Testament. So, you know, but anyway, so it's a place where man can order his life properly and give true worship to the Creator. And so when we talk about like styles of worship, now these are two incompatible views. So are we going to worship God how we want to worship Him, or how He wants to be worshipped? And sometimes those might be the same thing, but you know sometimes they're really not. And most of the time it's not. I'm not saying that there can be no absolute freedom, but you guys pretty much get what the sense of what I'm trying to say. And so of course we all want to say we would do things God's way rather than our own and all that kind of stuff. And otherwise who are we even worshiping? If we're just going to do everything in our own way. So in some sense there is some order to that. It is not just all us. And so, but if we're gonna be doing things God's way, then maybe we should change how we think and speak about the liturgy. Instead of starting with our desires and things like that, which there's nothing wrong with our desires. Whether we like a style of music, or whether it's like a preacher that works for us in whatever sense that means. And these are all things that that feel the elements of our worship experience these days. So to start, instead with all that, how about we just start with what God has revealed, and then work from there. I mean, when you look at Psalms, I mean, they're like a collection of like 150, and if you have a Orthodox study Bible like me, there's 151 liturgical prayers of worship to God. And we're going to get into those types of prayers, right? Especially when it comes to the Toda style of those prayers. And Jesus personally, really desires for us, for that, like when we pray, He even has a way that He desires for us to pray. And it's the Our Father. When it comes to Matthew 6, we know that famous passage from Matthew 6, 5:15, Luke 11, verses 1 through 4. He even shows us like how to pray. So there's even a way that we come to God, right? So the Old Testament is actually filled with like this kind of like precise descriptions on how to offer, the right worship. Do I mean that you're offering wrong worship? No, I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is there is a normative, a there is a essential way to approach God, and that's all I'm saying. Um, do I know this down to a T? No, but I'm sharing with you what I'm coming to learn just every day, and how I'm trying my best to apply it to my life. And but anyway, back to my final point. When you look at like the book of Revelation, it actually gives us a vision of like a heavenly liturgy of, because think about it. If you open up and look at the book of Revelation and you see what John sees, and that's what God's throne looks like, if you compare everything to what I was talking about in lesson one, and God is talking about how he wants Moses to go about doing this tabernacle thing, why is it that we could look at that and then like look at our church and churches and things and think it's okay for our churches just to be looking no different than, I don't know, just another building, or we speak of it as like a campus, and I think that the sacred, when we take out the sacredness of what we have, we get rid of sacred space and all this other stuff that I'm going to talk about in my next lesson, because I'm starting to get ahead of myself, so I need to just shut up. But the text that we have in the New Testament, they're not going to answer like every question, but I mean, they should help us to at least get started somewhere. So worship, just like, theology itself, it's not, you know, solely a matter of like your preferences, but it's about the truth. And I think that if we approach worship like that, I think we'll have a very different experience. And so before I continue, let me take one more peek to see if there's anybody in the chat. Oh, there they are. All right. Okay. Hey, Brian Gareese, Miss Piggy, J Man. Good to see you guys. All right. Um, so with that being said, on my long rant, let me go ahead and just get started here. So before I begin, what I want to show you guys are just some images. In other words, if I roll the clock back enough, um, people, what they looked like, how they dressed, what their churches looked like, the things that you see in their churches look radically different from, you know, everything that we do today. Whether it's, the very early churches and paintings, or the only branches of churches that still carry on those things, like Roman Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, Coptic Orthodox, Ethiopian Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, Eastern Catholics, all types of more liturgical, even some points of Anglican and Episcopal churches, which are Protestant breakoffs, but nevertheless, you'll notice that they look very, very different from, the postmodern Protestant Reformation. So you can see the central part of worship was a place that you would go. And so you see, I think that's the Apostle Paul or somebody holding a church. And over on the right, you don't see people coming to desire the sermon. No, you see them actually coming to desire the cup of the Lord, his body and blood. Like that was their main focus the earlier you go back. So you have to ask the question, what on earth caused the focus to change? I chose to put this picture in here because, like I said, the earlier drawings that you actually go back, even if it's like the 19th century, you will see that it is not a man standing up in front of a pulpit and having his right hand out with a microphone speaking. No, the earlier you go back, this is the main thing that people would draw. This is the main thing that people would have their minds on and focus on. It was not the sermon, it was the Eucharist. And these are the kind of images that would come to people's minds when they would do this thing, which goes to show that whatever they thought about the body and blood, it was not just bread alone. It was something much more deeper. And like I said, all throughout last year, and I believe like the year before, I visited an Orthodox church in Oakland. I'm really gonna start going again. I just had to really get some other things together in my life, but I'm really gonna start visiting again. But I can tell you that when I stepped in there, it looked very close, if not almost exact, to like something like this. Um, Very amazing. Of course, it was a Coptic. It was more of like a Antiochian Orthodox, and so there were people a lot more melanated. But for me, it didn't even matter. But this is the things that you would see. I remember when I stepped in. I remember during like my third or fourth visit, because I would visit on Saturdays. It was called Vespers, and I remember of all the times I stepped in, I never looked up all the way to the ceiling. And when I did, I basically jumped back, like I was startled. And the reason why is because when I looked directly up at the ceiling, like the actual top of the ceiling, not what's in front of you right there, no, when I looked at the top of the ceiling, it was this big, beautiful, but serious look of Jesus with his hands out. And he was huge. Like it looked like a big human standing above you. And I believe that the reason why they did these things was because it was to prepare you, to remind you that one day when you take your last breath, you're gonna, stand before God. And so when you end up, going into that church, you will always remember that moment forever. It's there forever. Every time you step in, that will probably be like the first thing that you think about. So you have to ask yourself, if you just go ahead and like remove all that, mm, do you think that you have a different kind of experience about what you think about God? And when you step into a place that is supposed to be sacred for Him, do you think you have a very different experience if you just go to four walls in a sermon? I think you would. And so that is the reason why, you know, they they had the church the way it was. And like I said, when you read the book of Revelation and you begin to look at these places, well, yeah, you kind of notice that they're kind of similar. You got a lot of holy people around, you got a lot of beautiful, powerful, sacred things going on. And when you get to God, do you think it's just going to be Him at the throne? No. The book of Revelation does not describe that. There's going to be a lot of things going on. Just like here, there's a lot of things going on. I'm just trying to make you think. Really basic question. How did our churches get from this to like what we have today? Now, like I said, this is another image that's very similar to when I walked in to the Antiochian Orthodox Church. Um, it was like this. And yeah, do you see how everyone's like focused? Okay, that's what it literally looks like. You don't see people, dress up however they like. Nope. Everyone kind of dresses the same. It's almost like they're all trying to focus on one thing. So everyone is wearing black. I'm not saying that I'm just telling you what I saw. Um, Everyone's focused. You don't see people on their cell phones. Um, you know, Maybe you might see that person way up in the front, like whispering something, but it's not. uh, the way that things would be if you were to go into like just like a regular church or something like that. Like everyone is focused on one thing, and in particular, one person. That's what it was like for me. That's what I remember. If you were to go back to Jerusalem or any place where the churches were, you won't see buildings that look like campuses um, or just buildings. No, you'll see things that look like temples. You'll see things that look like this. It looks otherworldly. It doesn't look like something that you would find, on the secular parts of the world. It looks like you're stepping into something else, almost as if you're stepping into where God lives. I mean, isn't that the way it should be? I mean, if we're to be, separate from the world, shouldn't it be something different about us? I'm not saying that we have to walk around and like, you know, ephod, holy garments, and nothing. No, I mean, when Jesus walked around, he wore regular clothes. So I'm not, don't, so don't like take my words out of balance here. I just want you to catch the essence of what I'm saying. Try not to be like so legalistically minded, like, oh man, are you saying no? That's not what I'm saying. But I think you guys get what I'm trying to say. So with that being said, let me go ahead and get started again with the lesson here. I just wanted to kind of set the tone to get you guys to understand, like, the people, we love what they write about, but I think that sometimes we should see like the images and things that they paint and go to the places and see what their world looked like, you know. So when we're talking about the body and blood of Christ, I want to go ahead and paint a background for you, a backdrop to show you that this practice just did not come out of nowhere, but it actually is a culmination of hints and practices. I'm going to say it again, hints and practices in the Old Testament. Elijah in the desert. I'm going to be using the Unlocked Literal Bible. I love it. You guys definitely ought to check it out. It's great. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree. He requested for himself that he might die and said, "It is enough. Now, Yahweh, take away my life, for I am no better than my dead ancestors." So he lay down and slept under a broom tree. Suddenly, an angel touched him and said to him, "Get up and eat." Elijah looked, and near his head was bread that had been baked on coals and a jug of water. So he ate and drank and lay down again. The angel of Yahweh came again, a second time, touched him, and said, "Get up and eat, because the journey will be too much for you." So he arose and ate and drank, and he traveled in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mountain of God. What does 40 mean in the Hebrew? Test. He was given bread and a jug of water, and this bread was baked on the fire of coals. And it definitely did last him the test, to the point where he was able to be powered enough to go through his journey for 40 days, his test for 40 days. Can you hear the truth that's coming out of this? When you partake of Christ, and I mean really do it, you will last the test of time. It will fuel you for your life. Our life is a test. If you need some help passing the test, this is what you need. You're not going to pass the test without this fuel, without this this flesh of life. Melchizedek, king of Salem, and Abraham here. This comes from Genesis 14. Now, when Abraham heard that the enemies had captured his relative, and I think that was Lot, he led out his 318 trained men. Isn't it funny there are 318 bishops at Nicaea? I think that's pretty cool. Who had been born in his house. That's a whole nother message in itself. And he pursued them as far as Dan. He divided his men against them at night and attacked them and pursued them as far as Hobah, which is north of Damascus. Then he brought back all the possessions and also brought back his relative Lot and his goods, as well as the women and the other people. After Abram returned from defeating, Chedorlaomer and the kings who were with him, the king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Shaveh, also called the kings of the valley. Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was a priest of God the Most High. He blessed him, saying, "Blessed be Abraham by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth. Blessed be God Most High, who has given your enemies into your hand." Then Abram gave him a tenth of everything. Tithe, bread, wine, priest, king, king of Salem. What does Salem mean again in Hebrew? Oh, right, Shalom, king of peace. It's pretty interesting, isn't it? This comes from Hebrews 7. When the New Testament writers look back into the Old Testament, this is what they said about Melchizedek. It said, "It was to him that Abraham gave a tenth of everything." His name, Melchizedek, means king of righteousness. His other title is King of Salem, that is, King of Peace. He is without father, without mother, without ancestors, with neither beginning of days nor end of life. Instead, he resembles the Son of God because he remains a priest forever. Now, when you look up that word, when it says, okay, there's no, where he has no record of mother and father, that literally means like, it doesn't mean like, oh, he, however he got here, he was just got here without parents. No, that means like there's no written record. There's no official written record of where this man came from. It didn't mean that he didn't actually have physical parents, but the emphasis is that he did not have any record of wherever he came from. It's almost as if he always was. And so that is the emphasis that the New Testament writers are drawing out from Melchizedek, and they compare him to Jesus. They say, oh, this guy was like Jesus. And then when you read about the story, you can see exactly why. Adam and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Yahweh God took the man and put him into the Garden of Eden to work it and to maintain it. It's funny because when you look at those words, to work it and to maintain it, to cultivate and things like that, do you know that those are the same Greek words in the Septuagint, even the Hebrew, I think? Those are the same words that are used to describe the Levitical priests when they're doing what they do in the temple. Look this stuff up. There's so much stuff I could go into, but I can't put it all there. So I try to bite-size this stuff because I'd be here all day. But I'm telling you, if you just do your homework, which is a new aspect of my lessons, you will find more stuff. Yahweh God commanded the man, saying, "From every tree in the garden you may eat freely, but from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you may not eat. For on the day you eat from it, you will surely die." So if Adam eats this thing here, he's going to die. Notice the difference. Look at what Jesus says. The Jews became angry among themselves and began to argue, saying, "How can this man give us his flesh to eat?" Then Jesus said to him, "Truly, truly, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you will not have life in yourselves." It's almost like a reversal of the garden, but yet it's like the same thing. You can see the themes. They're there. They said Jesus died on what? A tree. Isn't that what the New Testament says? What do you think that they meant when they said, why do you think they said that? Of course, they said he died on the cross. You know, it says, I preach cross. It says so all the time. But why would they say that he died on a tree? Cursed is he is died on a tree. Like, if you were a Jew, what is the only other reference to a tree that you could think of? What? The tree of life, or the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But yet the same warning is seen in the tree, just like the same warning is given by Jesus himself. The theme is there. Like, these are the real meanings behind this stuff. Oh, and then, you know what's funny? If you read Cyprian and Augustine and a few other individuals, the church fathers, they go nuts with these typologies. I mean, I've seen them do things like they'll say, okay, well, Adam, it basically sweated, you know, by the sweat of his brow, and he worked, you know, he has to work now, and yet they'll say that Jesus sweat drops of blood, and that was his work in where? In the Garden of Gethsemane. But yet Adam was in the Garden of Eden, and yet the thorns had grown on all kinds of things because of what Adam messed up. And yet Jesus wore a crown of thorns. It caused him to, you know, even sweat bullets of just water of blood even more. Like, there's just so, like, so they would go nuts on these typologies. Like, that's what the church fathers would do, because they would just look at the whole Old Testament and they would see Jesus. And so, you know, when it comes to these like ways that later commentators ended up looking at the passages, it was really because of them. And then, you know, like I said, where did the church fathers get that from? They got that from the disciples who wrote the New Testament. And that's the reason why you see like little examples about that. You know, you'll see examples. You know, Paul will say, look, Christ is our Passover lamb. Oh, boom, there's a typology. Like, there's plenty of that in the New Testament. There's plenty more in the church fathers. Why? Because those were the disciples of the apostles. So it just carries on. And yeah, people say that, oh, Christians don't know what they're saying. Like, no, like, we've been saying this out since the beginning. Where did they get it from? Jesus. If you look in Luke 22, it actually says that, you know, Jesus opened the minds of the disciples, and then after that, they can understand the scriptures. And then after that, he explained to them the scriptures, and it said, oh, this is how Jesus was to die and to rise again. Like, that's what it says. So they get all this typology stuff from Jesus, according to the Gospel of Luke. It's all there. Consuming the lamb. Yahweh spoke to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt. He said, for you, this month will be the starting of months, the first month of the year to you. Tell the assembly of Israel on the 10th day of this month, they must each take a lamb or a young goat for themselves. Each family doing this. Each family. A lamb for each household, each family. That's more like a personal Jesus, isn't it? And it's a collective thing. If the household is too small for a lamb, the man and his next door neighbor are to take a lamb or a young goat and meat that will be enough for their number of the people. Oh, in other words, you know, we have to compel people to come on in to this marriage supper. Isn't that what one of Jesus's parables was? Hey, get everybody to come here. It should be enough for everyone to eat. Seems like he doesn't want to leave anybody out. He's not being like particular here. So they must take enough meat to feed them all. That's a very interesting way to put this. You know, it kind of reminds me of Jesus said in John 6, I give my food, my body for the flesh of the life of the world. This theme seems to keep carrying, doesn't it? Your lamb or young goat must be without blemish, 1 year old, a 1 year old male. You may take one of the sheep or goats. You must keep it until the 14th day of the month. Then the whole assembly of Israel must kill these animals at twilight. You must take some of the blood and put it on the two sides of the doorposts, on the tops of the door and frames of the houses in which you will eat the meat. You must eat the meat that night. After the first morning, after the first roasting it over a fire. Eat it with bread made without yeast, along with bitter herbs. Mm, bitter herbs kind of reminds me of the painful death that Christ had to go through, right? I guess he tasted death for every man. It's funny how these themes keep popping out. That was Hebrews 2. Do not eat it raw or boiled in water. Instead, roast it over fire with its head, legs, and inner parts. Wow. You're not just going to partake of it partially. No, you're taking the whole thing. It's all or nothing, right? There's no partiality with Jesus. You must not let any of it be left over until morning, right? You must burn it. You must burn whatever is left over in the morning. This is how you must eat it: with your belt fastened, shoes on your feet, and your staff in your hand. You must eat it hurriedly. It is Yahweh's Passover. It's almost like they're eating this food to prepare them to go on a journey. So wow. So this isn't just something that you do, oh, this is so nice to do. No, it's because I'm wanting you to do this because I'm taking you somewhere. In other words, this partaking of this Passover meal, this thing that they're doing, is to fuel them, to get them ready to go somewhere. Are you hearing this in your personal walk with Christ in your life? Are you hearing this within the confines of the church that you migrate your spiritual walk with? I hope you do. John 6. I am the bread of life. Your fathers ate manna in the wilderness, and so that's why they were fastened on their belts and getting ready to go, because I guess they had to go somewhere. But listen to what Jesus says about this. Your fathers ate manna in the wilderness, and they died. This is a bread which comes down from heaven, so that a person may eat some of it, so that a person may eat some of it and not die. I am the living bread that came down from heaven. If anyone eats some of this bread, he will live forever. The bread that I will give is my flesh for the life of the world. The Jews became angry among themselves and began to argue, saying, how can this man give us flesh to eat? Give us his flesh to eat. And yet, then Jesus said to them, truly, truly, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you will not have life in yourselves. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood has everlasting life, and I will raise him up at the last day. For my flesh is true food, and my blood is true drink. He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood remains in me, and I in him. As the living Father sent me, and as I live because of the Father, so he who eats me, he will also live because of me. This is a bread that has come down from heaven, not as the fathers ate and died. He who eats this bread will live forever. Now, I've seen some dope Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox breakdowns of this stuff right here, and there's no way that you're going to walk away from this and say, oh, he really didn't mean it all like that. No, when you actually look up the word flesh and you look up the word eat and things like that, I mean, there's certain Greek words that Jesus could have been like a little bit more mild with. No, he used like the strongest Greek words for eat. Like, you know, he didn't just use like bite or chew. He used like gnaw and crunch. Like, why would he do that? Like I said, if you guys just do your homework on this stuff, you'll have to sit there and think like, okay, well, um, I think Jesus was being more than just symbolic. I think he really meant something with this. But I know that a lot of people have their own arguments against that. But it really does go to show that whatever Jesus was talking about, I think we can all agree that he was serious. And I'll just leave it at that. Do this in remembrance of me. Now, the latter part, the next part that we're going to go into in the next hangout, it is going to be, the remembrance of me. But for right now, we're going to focus on the do this in remembrance of me. Luke 22. When the time came, he sat down with the apostles. Then he said to them, I have greatly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. For I say to you, I will not eat it again until it is fulfilled in the kingdom of God. Then Jesus took a cup, and when he had given thanks, Eucharist, he said, take this and share it among yourselves. For I say to you, he will not drink of the fruit of the vine again, or I will not drink of the fruit of the vine again until the kingdom of God comes. Now, there's a deeper meaning to this. It talks about a third cup, fourth cup, and there's this other kind of stuff that goes on with this. I don't want to get into that, but I would say do your homework on this too. Then he took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave to them, saying, this is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. If you look at this in an actual transliteration, basically what Jesus says, it just says, tautu poieti eston emon anamnesin. And what that means in the Greek, when you look up that word, tautu poieti, that's what we get when we say do this. And so Thayer's definition, it means like to make or to do a thing unto one, right? To do a thing unto one. I think it's interesting that I don't know why I just didn't say to offer unto one. That was the first time, in my personal opinion, that I actually found a little bit of bias in a Greek lexicon. I could be wrong, but I just wonder why that is. It doesn't have that word offer, not one time. To do to one, with designation of time to pass, spend, to celebrate, keep, to make ready. And so at the same time, to institute the celebration of the Passover, to perform to a promise. It's funny because, like I said, the part that's missing from this Greek word is, to offer. It left that part out. Like, it just didn't say it. I thought that was pretty odd because when you actually look at it, it means to offer this. Why do I know this? Because anytime you look in the Old Testament, the Greek Septuagint, it's everywhere. 394 times when I looked at it in my eSword. Of course, probably about 70 times if you're talking sacrificially. I left just 2 of those 70 citations just on the bottom right, Leviticus and Psalms. But there's 70 of them. And so when you look in Exodus, for example, I think this is the first time it ever comes up, it says you must regularly offer on the altar every day 2 lambs a year old. Keep on running to that year old, huh? And yet it says in the Greek, kai tata estin apoiesis. And so there it is. Offer this. So in other words, this could be translated as this is my body, which is given for you. Offer this in remembrance of me. So literally, Jesus is essentially commanding a sacrifice. Now, you're probably wondering, like, well, Matt, how on earth is Jesus commanding a sacrifice? I mean, it's more just like an offering. There's no blood spilt. And that's the thing. Things that were sacrifices in the Old Testament weren't just blood only. They called a lot of things sacrifices, including one particular sacrifice. Now, some quick homework. I want you guys to look up the word given for you. Study that phrase, okay? Study this one phrase from Luke 22:19. Google the crap out of it, okay? It may lead you to some places that you don't theologically agree with or whatever, but just study the matter. Study it out. You know, definitely look into it. That's all I gotta say. Study this phrase given for you. And let me know what you come up with. Leave a comment. Email me at ssoreal@gmail.com. Share with us in the comment section what you come up with. Didache. This is AD 60. This is right along with the New Testament. And listen to what it calls the communion or Eucharist. Listen to what it calls this sacred act. This is the short version. Assemble on the Lord's day. And it's funny it says the Lord's day because that's an actual phrase in the New Testament. In the book of Revelation that John uses, refers to Sunday, the day the Lord rose. And break bread and offer the Eucharist. But first, make confession for your faults, so that your sacrifice may be a pure one. Anyone who has a difference with his fellow is not to take part with you until he has been reconciled. Kind of sounds like 1 Corinthians 11 a little bit, doesn't it? So as to avoid any profanation of your sacrifice. Sounds like Matthew 23 and 24 a little bit. For this is the offering of which the Lord had said, everywhere and always bring me a sacrifice that is undefiled. For I am a great king, says the Lord, and my name is the wonder of the nations. So he takes Malachi's complaint here and, puts it right along with the Eucharist. Ain't that something? An offering that's going to be made everywhere. Nudge, nudge, hint, hint. That shows that the gospel is going out to the world and that the church is moving on its feet again, just like God used to with the tabernacle, until the Jews decided, hey, you know what? We want to be like the kings on the earth. We want a king and we want a temple so we can have one place. Sounds like in the New Testament, God is getting back to moving around, just like, how he started. But now he's moving around through what is called the assembly, the church of the firstborn, the church, right? Also, if you look at Malachi, I think like the reference is about how, because I read it in my Jesus and the Law of Moses. He was complaining, saying, look, man, you know what? You guys don't even give pure sacrifices. All right. And it's getting to the point where you guys are starting to make me look bad among the nations. Y'all ain't going to make me look bad among the nations. You guys are going to give me clean and pure sacrifices. My name is going to be respected among the nations. You hear me? I'm the God of gods. I'm God of all. I will have respect. That's essentially what you get when you read Malachi. This is a longer version. I'm not going to read it because, like I said, this is more of a participatory kind of lesson. I want you to take this time to pause the video and read this part for yourself. All right? So I'll leave it on the screen for a few seconds so that way you can pause it. And we are going to move on. And I want you to come to your own conclusions. Toda and the peace offering. You're probably wondering, what's this? Well, really, the peace offering is an actual offering. It's the main part of something else that had a bit of a tiny little subset of it. In other words, along with this peace offering was something known as a toda offering. And toda is a Greek word or the Hebrew word that means thanks. How do you say thanks in Greek? Eucharist. So you can see where all this is going. So yeah, a part of this peace offering was this little extra offering called toda. I want to go and look at that. This comes from jewfact.org, and it says, a peace offering is an offering expressing thanks and gratitude to God for his bounties and his mercies. The Hebrew term is a type offering is zabak, shlalim, or shlamim, and, or just, shlamim, which is related to the word shalom, meaning peace or whole. And a representative portion, right, a good chunk of the offering is burnt on the altar. Sound familiar? Right? Exodus. A portion, is given to the priest, the Kohanim, I believe. That's the priest. So a portion is given to him. And the rest is eaten by the offerer and his family. That's interesting. This is a pretty unique offering, isn't it? Now, I've never heard of an offering like this where you take something that the priest partakes of and you actually take it home to eat with your family. Ain't that something? So I can imagine a father taking the lamb home to his family. The father taking the lamb home to his family. Thus, everyone gets a part of this offering. This category of offering includes thanksgivings, offerings. Oh, there it is. Toda. Told you. In Hebrew, Toda, which was obligatory for survivors of life-threatening crisis. Well, yeah. I mean, if I was a survivor of a life-threatening crisis, I'd be thankful. Do you see where I'm going with this? Let me continue. Free will offerings and offerings made after the fulfillment of a vow. Oh, that's cool. Note that this class of offerings has nothing to do with sin. Now, this is the part I kind of disagree with, but I'm just going to go along with it anyway. He says, note that this class of offerings has nothing to do with sin. In fact, the Talmud says that in the age of the Messiah, when there is no more sin, this offering will be the only class of offering that is brought to the temple. So for all those people that love to go into Ezekiel and say, oh, look, they're still sacrificing. Well, it's not going to be anything of blood. And if there's a thanks offering that does not have blood and it is called a sacrifice, then I can understand how, in the times of heaven and, the age to come where there's no more death, I can understand while that one would be the only one to be around. I can understand that. That makes sense. So that's the reason why when you look at Ezekiel and all these other people that say, oh, we're going to be doing this in the temple. Well, what kind of sacrifice? Just trying to get you guys to think. Now, it's funny because when you look at Leviticus 7, it does say this. So it's right. Look at what it says. This is the law of the sacrifice of peace offerings, which people will offer to Yahweh. If anyone offers it in order to give thanks, then he must offer it with the sacrifice of cakes made without yeast, but mixed with oil, of cakes made without yeast, but spread with oil, and of cakes made with fine flour that is mixed with oil. I have no clue what that means, but it involves bread. Isn't that something? Also, for the purpose of giving thanks, he must offer with his peace offering cakes of bread made with yeast. He is to offer one of each of kind of these sacrifices. They call these things sacrifices, but notice that there's no blood involved. As an offering presented to Yahweh, it belongs to the priests who sprinkle the blood of the peace offerings onto the altar. So the priest does something that has to do with blood, not the offerer. The person presenting a peace offering for the purpose of giving thanks, he must eat the meat of his offering on the day of the sacrifice. And of course, where does he eat that? He eats that with his family, right? He must not leave any of it until morning. So there's a reference. Where am I going with this? Toda. So if you look, this is the number one reason this act has actually, influenced the practice of the way that people pray and praise and worship God. In other words, people kind of acknowledge that, they had enemies that were out to kill them. Perhaps you've had abuse in your life where people who were supposed to love you probably did not love you the way that God wanted them to. Or maybe you had death itself stare you in the face. Maybe you went through some great sickness. Maybe you lost everything you had in the burning of your home. Whatever it was, it was pretty bad. Whatever had happened in your life, but yet somehow God carried you. He intervened. He came in. Right? Just like you see Sam carrying Frodo. Almost like how Christ has to break the leg of a rebellious lamb and put it on his shoulder to carry him to where he has to go. Or like when you see Arwen actually carrying Frodo and she's keeping him from the 9 Nazgul, which are like twisted ring wraiths, these kind of grim reaper, soulless, undead writers, and she's basically protecting him like angels protect humans. Basically, see a greater power coming to the rescue. And this is the origin of from lament to praise. So if you wanted to know where this theme came from in the Bible of why the Jews and early Christians practiced this way, the way that they did, well, it actually came from the peace offering and the Toda offering. That's where it came from, right? You're thanking God from delivering you from some real bad situation. This is the origin of praise. So when you look at from lament to praise, it's all over the Bible. I mean, if you look at the Kings, and of course I think there were like 19 of them, and there's other ones. They do this, right? If you look at the Psalms, oh my gosh, that's everywhere in the Psalms. If you look at the Passover itself, it is a type of lament to praise. I mean, how long were they in Egypt? A long time. But yet they can praise God. Why? Because he delivered them out. And of course, the Eucharist itself is from a lament to praise, right? I mean, I could go on and on. I mean, there really were more examples, like the cross, right? Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. Father, why have you forsaken me? And yet, what happened in that same psalm? He rose from the dead, right? All glory to God. From lament to praise. Now, of course, we as African Americans, man, we ended up, we turned that thing out, man. Like, I was once lost, but now I'm found, blind, I see, and all this stuff, like, and it just everyone kind of has that theme in their praise. You kind of notice that, even in worship. This is where it comes from. Quick homework: study this lament to praise area. Passover. Just see what you find from lament to praise, and let me know what you find. Here's a lament to praise. It once again, I'm not going to read. I want you to read it. I'll tell you what it's about, though. This is about Hezekiah when, God told him, look, you're about to die. And now there's more to it than this, because when I started to read it, I was like, oh, I'm going to point this out. It's like, no, I'm not going to point it out in the hangout. I want them to read it. I want you to read it. Please read the screen on the left, okay? There are things I wanted to point out in the hangout, but I want you to catch it. Now, of course, we know what happened. Hezekiah turned his face to the wall and said, the grave can't praise you, Lord. Can't do none of that. And he said, all right, I'm going to add 15 years to your life. And so from there, Hezekiah gave a Toda, right? He gave a little psalm from bad to good. How about this one? This is a psalm. This psalm was so big, I had to keep on putting dot, 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 dot between the whole thing because it would not fit on the screen. They had a lot to lament about. Of course, they have so much to praise about as well. So I want you to read this from lament and also read to praise. I'm not going to read it for you. I want you to read this part for yourself. Here's a third one, right? This is from lament to praise. This is another psalm, a famous Psalm 51, right? Purge me with hyssop. We know this, especially everyone likes to, just totally butcher and misinterpret verse 5. But, maybe we'll get to that next time. Study this lament praise, Psalm 22. This is the one that Jesus quotes from. I find it interesting that this one is a perfect split. I wonder what that means. Sometimes I think about the old covenant and new covenant. Sometimes I think about the veil being torn. It's a perfect split. Why don't you study that one and read that on your own Bible study time? So when you decide to open up your Bible and you're like, I don't know what to study this time, like, well, why don't you go through that one? All right, and tell me what you find. Maybe we'll do this. Maybe these will be all the things, like, because I'm trying to. This is the new part I'm trying to do. Like, I'm trying to give you guys things to study, so that way when we come back next time, we will we'll have some things to kind of work on, right? So, last slide, the heart of the matter. This comes from, I believe a Anglican, Episcopal Anglican Christian, and his name is J.N.D. Kelly. And this is what he had to say about the Passover, or not the Passover, but the Eucharist. This is what he has to say. It was natural for early Christians to think of the Eucharist as a sacrifice. The fulfillment of prophecy demanded a solemn Christian offering, and the rite itself was wrapped in the sacrificial atmosphere with which our Lord invested the Last Supper. The words of the institution, "Do this, tuto poieti," must have been charged with sacrificial overtones for second century ears. Justin Martyr, you know, at any rate, understood them to mean offer this. Isn't that interesting? And yet my lexicon just failed to pick that up, but the church fathers did. Really makes me think differently about my lexicon. I can't believe my own lexicon was biased. I'm mad. Anyway, all right. All right. Anyway, I'm not saying do away with lexicons, but let me continue. The bread and wine, moreover, are offered for a memorial, and that is eis anamnesin of the Passion. And that is the phrase that we're going to be studying on our next hangout. A phrase which, in view of his identification of them with the Lord's body and blood, implies much more than an act of purely spiritual recollection. And he's right, because when you look up that, I'm not going to tell you what it means. Let me continue. Christ's words to his apostles to celebrate the Eucharist in the New Testament Greek, tuto poieti ton emin anamnesin, translated to "do this in remembrance of me." The Greek word poiein here is used several times in the Septuagint, Greek translation of the Old Testament, in sacrificial contexts. See Exodus 29:38, like I gave y'all earlier in the presentation. To tell someone, offer this for my memorial sacrifice, is to direct him to fulfill a priestly function. You can see Hebrews 5:1 and 8:3. This is kind of getting into my next lesson. So the early church has correctly regarded Christ's words as the institution of the apostles' priesthood and as the basis for all future priests who offer the Eucharistic sacrifice. This is the number one reason why the Eucharist was the central and main part of the liturgy, a word that would later come to be called worship. The origin of praise came directly from the Toda Eucharist sacrifice, hence the term sacrifice of praise. What is a highlight of worship at your church? Is it the Eucharist or the sermon? If your church does communion, then are the ministers of communion priests such as the apostles? And if they are, can they trace their succession of such a priesthood back to the apostles themselves? That's all I have, guys. I've shown you guys all these things, not to give you every single solitary answer for every single. Nope. Decided not to do that. Instead, I just wanted to give you guys types and shadows just enough to get you to see a lot of things. I just want you guys to think differently when you think about the body and blood of Christ, the Eucharist, praise, worship, what it looked like, how the people dressed, how otherworldly the places that they went to looked. It did not look like a place that was on earth. It looked like they were stepping into somewhere else. And when they began to praise and worship God, this is where it came from. This is the origin of even how we pray, right? I hope that's been a blessing. And I guess the last thing that I'll do before I end the hangout, I will go ahead and look at the chat. So let me see. All right. What is this? Oh man. He said I woke up early due to heat. uh First gathering in houses were in secret. Hmm. Wow, okay. All right. So, all right, that was pretty much it. All right, y'all. Peace and blessings. All right, see you later, Lita. All right, Miss Piggy. All right, Farsights, Sham Yam, Caramel Crunk. What's good? And whoever Wakena Halloween is, hey, good to see you. Remy Canadian, God bless you. Beatrice, what's good? Yes, we're up early. J Man, you already know what it is. Big Reese, love you, bro. And all right, I'm out. Peace and blessings, everyone. Please like, share, and subscribe. Pass this off to your friends. If you guys have anything that you want to say, put it in the comment section. If you have any personal questions for me, you can reach me at 412-872-8037. And also, you can email me at ssoreal@gmail.com. I am Matthew Solly, a.k.a. So Real, from Oasis Ministries. God bless you all, and see you all next time.